Every time I look at your name, I fret on this stuff.
Yeah.
Scandinavian.
Is that right? Gee, yeah, I didn't know that. I thought it was one of those things where you may have come from a part of the country where spellings kind of take their own.
Just like some family.
Yeah, right.
My maternal grandfather did spell it that way.
Norwegian.
It was Norwegian.
Okay. Well, my name Ted is a product of a very stubborn grandmother. I had a very stubborn grandmother. When my father was born, he was down the farm in the remote part of central Illinois. And he was the number 7 in the line. And my grandmother decided when he was born that she wanted to name him Teddy. And it was an old country doctor who took care of all the ladies and registered their babies with the county and all that stuff. So he came around to see how this kid was doing. He said, "No, name him Teddy." And the old country doctor said, "No, Mrs. Ward, we can't do that." He said, "Why can't I?" "Well, it's not a formal name." She said, "Well, if it's good enough for our president, it's good enough for this kid." It was during the immediate aftermath of Teddy Roosevelt, or actually during the time of Teddy Roosevelt. So my grandmother stubbornly insisted that his name was Teddy. And so she and this old country doctor went round and round on this thing several different times. He was out past the farm. And to make a long story short, he refused to register. So finally, he told her that the only way he'd register that name is if she shortened it to Ted. And he would be much happier with Theodore. My grandmother said, "Theodore? No way, Theodore." The old country doctor said, "But that is the name of the president." "That's not what we call him, not on this farm, but no." So she finally compromised and agreed to Ted. Whereupon, the old country doctor, having not done it for so many months, forgot to do it. So during World War II, when all able-bodied males had to get registered for the draft or whatever, my father, who was actually then at the outer edge of draftable, I mean, I was closer to draftable than he was, he couldn't prove his age because he didn't have a birth certificate. Furthermore, he got in touch with his home county, and then when he discovered that this old doctor had forgotten altogether to file the name. So anyway, my dad had to go and get my grandmother, who was still living at that point, 1941, I think, or 40, and drag her down to the county courthouse, whereupon she had to swear that indeed this was her kid. Indeed he was born as of such and such a date, and indeed his name was, and once again, Teddy. Whereupon my father, this time, took the place of the old country doctor and said, "No, mother, it's Ted." Anyway, when I came along, my mother's dad figured that, no, it's good enough for Dad, he's good enough for me. So I got the Ted. It's not a shortened name for anything. In England, it's shortened for Edward, for heaven's sake. But in the U.S., it's shortened for various things, Theodore, Theobald, and a lot of other fun names. But almost always meaning something about beloved of God. Not bad, not bad. But I'm the shortened version. Anybody says, what's he like? Well, he's named beloved of God, but he is the shortened version. Anyway, that's the matter of pride. So every time my teachers along in school would push me on this, I'd tell them the story of my father. But the one that he loved to tell the most was when he went to enroll in the regional unity equivalent today of junior high school, and it was at a farm center that was about 4 miles away, and he had to go every day on a horse. So he went every day. He was a farmer and they raised horses, so that was his way of getting to school was on a horse. There was no such thing as school buses at that time. So he went to school every day, summer, winter, on the horse. He got to school this one day, and the teachers said, "What is your name?" And he said, "Well, my name is Ted Ward." And she said, "There is no such name." He said, "Oh, yes, there is." And he offered to tell her the story about the old guy that they all still knew because he was still living at that point. She says, "No." She says, "Nobody would name their kid Ted." And he said, "Well, my mother did." And so she said, "Nope, I'm going to put you on my log as Theodore." He said, No, my name is Ted. Now, this is a junior high kid. He got his back up. I mean, he got his back up. No way. And she said, that's the way it's going down here until you get a statement from your mother to the contrary. Well, that wouldn't have been hard to do, except that it meant going home 4 miles on the horse and back 4 miles. And he just took off. He just took off, went home, got the statement, came back. He wasn't going to let that sit there on their school records even for 5 minutes. So anyway, in our family, this matter of Ted is a pretty touchy issue. It's nice to know something about your forebears. You didn't ask me about my middle name. My middle name is Jeff Ford. Oh, that's not my middle name, sure. My middle name is Warren. Guess where I got that? Well, when you figure that out, you ask Warren Benson where he got his. And I think it's different, but he's Scandinavian and I'm not. That's one of the actually different stuff. Where did I see you? I should know this guy. Who's it? My middle name, Warren, comes from our family ancestry. We have a mixed stock. Like most Americans of any long tenure in the United States, we have a mixed background. Most of us can't tell you where we come from because we really are a mixture. And I can tell you a lot of the places where my genes come from. And Levi Strauss is not one of them. But they come from Ireland, and they come from France, and they come from England. And the name Ward is an English name. So the name itself, that's actually about an eighth of my family background. Comes from the Ward side of us. And then the Warren actually comes out of the Warren family, which was a very old American family. The Warrens were some of the first people over on the early boats. They came over from England. And the Warren was the same family of Warrens that contributed a general to the Revolutionary War. General Warren, whose picture, dying in great anguish and with his arm out like this, like he's singing in an opera, it appears in many of the old lithographs of the Revolutionary War. But here he is dying at what was called then Breed's Hill, which today is called Bunker Hill in Boston. And there is this Bunker Hill that was fought over in the Revolution. And the column is led by General Warren, General Joseph P. Warren. And by golly, I'm the ninth after that one. And General Warren lost the Battle of Bunker Hill. What can I say? What can I say? Nothing like being named for a hero who lost a battle. Some of the rest of you are named for heroes who lost a battle too, right? But my name Ward is even more interesting. Do any of you have any idea where the name Ward came from? This is the kind of thing I'm sure you're just dying to know. The reason you came today and the reason you enrolled for this course. Whether you want to know it or not, you're going to hear it. Because it really is rather amusing. The name Ward, W-A-R-D, is actually an anglicization of something that the Brits thought the Latins were saying during the Norman conquest. Actually during the during the Roman occupation in the last part of the Great Roman Empire. When the Romans were all over southern England, they built the baths at Bath, England, and so forth. And they brought to England the structuring system for cities, towns, bigger towns. And they divided in that period, the Romans divided their cities into what they called guards, which was G-U-A-R-D, was the best thing to do in English. And it's the same kind of funny sound of G that the Spanish still use when they say Guatemala. The Spanish don't say Guatemala. How is it in Spanish?
Guatemala.
Hear it, listen again. Again.
Guatemala.
All right, now if you were to use that sound on G-U-A-R-D, how would it sound?
G-U, Ward.
Ward. Got it? So the Ward name is actually a transliteration into the English and the vocabulary and the orthography of England of the name Ward. You hear about the political wards, in big cities they talk about the first ward, the politicians this, and the second ward. Those are actually like precincts, districts, and they actually come out of the Latin for G-U-A-R-D. And the reason they were called Guard guards, or logs, is because the civil servants in that area were known as the wardens of that ward. Now, who were they? They were civil servants. They were not politicians, they were not administrators. They were in charge of the jobs of keeping the place fairly neat and clean. That's the history of my name. But more precisely, in the English sense, when the name Ward was adopted and became a W-A-R-D family name, it was a family name that was identified as the name that you gave your kids as a passing along generational name after Henry III's and that, way back, when he was the first king who decreed that Englishmen would no longer use the Scandinavian-style system of talking about Andrews and Anderson, and Anders and Anderson, and Jack and Jackson, the son names, and the daughter names, which was a Northern European habit. But the English were going to be different. They were going to knock that. And from now on, there would be perpetuity family names. Henry III, I think. And anyway, he said, you can draw your family name from any one of several features. A location where your family is centered, which is, for example, the origin of the name Lincoln, because there's a region in England of Lincolnshire. So the Lincolns all came from Lincolnshire. So the people of Lincolnshire all of a sudden adopted the last name Lincoln, unless they wanted a name like Hart, which shortened then ultimately to H-A-R-T, Hart. Or you could take your name, and that was out of a place, or the second Hart was a quality or characteristic that you felt was a mark of your family and your line. So many of the names about qualities, Hart or Love, actually, the British name, the English name Love comes out of that. Many of the quality names come out of that particular choice that people could make. Or they could choose to choose their name out of an occupation. And this was one of the more common ones. So, for example, you have the smiths, which were workers in iron, and the cooks, who, gee, I can't remember what they did. And the fishers, which was a shortening of fishermen. The fishers and the millers, yeah.
Right.
Right? Yeah, right. And the wrights were people who worked with tools to create things like wheelwrights and other wrights of that sort. And also then some funny ones that we don't still think of that way today, such as, for example, coopers. Cooper is a person who makes barrels. Hoopers, people who makes the rings or the hooks for the barrels. Thatchers, that's an interesting one, thatchers. You know what the thatcher is? The man who makes the thatch for the roof. But the person who actually puts on the roof is called a decker. You didn't know that, did you? And you're not taking notes. Come on, get with it. And so the people who were in the cities doing the dirty work took the name ward. And as a matter of fact, the wards of the cities of that time had two major jobs. They lit the lamps on the corners of the streets at night. And in the morning, they came around and blew out the lights, capped them off, and pushed these great big barrels. And I won't go into too much detail about the barrels, but this was before the days of city sewers. So you get the idea. So anyway, the wards are the people who light the lamps or carry out the you-know-what, depending on the circumstance. And I've always felt that that was really quite a calling. And I have thanked the Lord for that privilege. And so whenever I have a reasonable chance to share that with people, and I do introduce myself sometimes at conferences and so forth, just to be clear about all this, so that people will see that I'm perfectly willing to carry on the family tradition, lighting the lights, if possible. And if not, we'll carry out the you-know-what. Well, that's something about it.
So which did you get a greater percentage on these papers?
No, we had some help with this. I had a lady married to a Swiss, whose name was Ulmer, who is from the city of Ulm in which canton? Anyway, Dwayne Ulmer is actually Swiss.